Hi everybody, welcome back to L Space. If you're new, my name is Tristan, and today I am going to be doing my very first book haul on this channel. I've got quite a few books these are kind of books that I've just amassed over the last few days, or well, last like week to month, etc. It doesn't matter, but these are all the books that I've recently acquired that I'm really excited to read. So I'm going to show them off and maybe give you some inspiration on some reading material because I am certainly very excited about all of these ones. So I'm going to divide them up into basically, I guess, two categories. I did not mean for it to happen this way, but it just so happened that half of it is from a single author. It's all like classics, and then the other half is all Palestinian literature, which I'm very excited about. So I will go ahead and do the classics first, and then we'll get into the Palestinian literature toward the end. So I've not talked about him, Wally. So I've not talked about him very much on this channel yet, but I'm certainly planning to. But one of my favorite 20th century authors is E.M. Forster. So I've read a lot of his books, actually. I've read almost all of them. I think I'm missing maybe 2 books of his that I have yet to read, but I bought them, so that will be quickly remedied. So I bought all of these on like thrift books. Wally, get down. I hope the ankle's fine. So I bought all of these on thrift books because I have a weird thing about not buying classics brand new. Also, there's millions of copies of them out there, so you can always find them really cheap. It's definitely not really it's not a genre, but it's really not a like classification of books that you need to be spending a lot of money on, So I think most of these I spent less than $7 on them, so I'm pretty excited about that. So let's just dive in. So all of these, like I said, are from E.M. Forster. The first one being Howard's End, which is kind of one of his most famous novels. And I've read this before. I read it on Libby as an audiobook, and I really liked it. And so I wanted to have a physical copy so that I could read it again and kind of take a little bit more time with it, because it's a very complex story, and it's a very rich story as well that has a lot of cool things going on. So let me give you the synopsis. So a chance acquaintance brings together the prosperous bourgeois Wilcox family and the clever, culture, and idealistic Schlegel sisters. As clear-eyed Margaret develops a friendship with Mrs. Wilcox, the impetuous Helen brings into their midst a young bank clerk named Leonard Bast, who lives at the edge of poverty and ruin. When Mrs. Wilcox dies, her family discovers that she wants to leave her country home, Howard's End, to Margaret. Thus, Forster sets in motion a chain of events that will entangle 3 different families and brilliantly portrays their aspirations to personal and social harmony. And when I read this the first time, I was very captivated. I'm sorry about the background noise, by the way. Wally, as always, is playing. It's laundry day, so she's playing in the laundry hamper. Wally, you're ridiculous. Okay. But I was very captivated by this book, and there's a lot of really cool things that Forster does. A lot of his books take place right before World War I, and so it's kind of like the last few years of England right before war breaks out, and so the things that are going on in that time I think are just really interesting. So next up is Where Angels Fear to Tread, which I think is a fantastic title. He's always got really good titles. I love this one in particular, and I have not read this one, so let's do the synopsis, shall we? On traveling to Italy with her friend Caroline Abbott, the impulsive English widow Lilia Hareton outrages her dead husband's family by meeting and quickly becoming engaged to a dashing but deeply unsuitable Italian man, 12 years her junior. Infuriated, her ex-brother-in-law Philip sets off from England to her new home in the Tuscan town of Monteriano, but finding himself unable to persuade Lilia to leave her handsome, uncouth new lover, returns to England without her. When Lilia's marriage leads to sudden tragedy, however, Philip and Caroline feel compelled to return once more to Italy, where they find they are forced to examine their own lives. Deeply moving, Where Angels Fear to Tread is amongst the greatest 20th century literary explorations of vice, virtue, and the nature of prejudice. And that's definitely one of the hallmarks of Forster's work, kind of examining the values and the culture of his day. Sometimes he's critical of the sort of wisdom of the day. He's also one definitely to criticize class, which is always very interesting. All right, next up is The Longest Journey, also by E.M. Forster. And this one I think is the one I'm most excited for. I have heard a lot of really interesting things about this one. Look at that. It says right on the back, of Forster's 5 novels, The Longest Journey is perhaps the most brilliant, the most dramatic, and the most passionate. And it says, in its arbitrary departures from the properties of the modern novel, there's a genuine refreshment and even a special claim upon our affections. So that is actually not the synopsis of this. I might do a little intermission at one point in the video to give a synopsis, but basically this is a Cambridge novel, and it's detailing more of his college days, and it's dealing with a lot of that. So I'm very excited to read this one. I've heard that it's his most unusual of all of the ones he's written, and maybe even the hardest to read, but I don't actually know because I've never read it. So I'm very excited to read it because it sounds cool. Oops. Okay, and then the last one I'm also very excited about, and that is just selected stories, but look at how cool that cover is. It's so cool. It's like an old lady being laughed at by a bunch of drama masks. It's so cool. But yeah, these are just short stories. Forster was a really good short story writer. There's one in here called A Panic, which is, the story of a panic. And a lot of these, so Forster, I should say, was real gay, and he was not exactly super closeted, despite the fact that he lived throughout the entire 20th century up until he died literally a year after the Stonewall riots happened. So he was not living in the most accepting time. So he was born a few years after the Oscar Wilde trials, and then he died the year after the Stonewall riots happened. Some of his short stories have a little bit more of the queer undertones. There are a few other sort of queer-coded aspects of some of his other novels, but his short stories, from what I remember reading, because I read his biography, have a little bit more, like I said, the queer undertones. And then I've got, where is it? Morris on my shelf, which I have read, and this is an explicitly gay love story with a happy ending. It's not my favorite of his novels, interestingly enough, but I also think that I do need to reread it, because when I did read it, I just don't think I was in the right place for it when I was reading it the first time. But yeah, this is a gay love story that takes place in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, which is quite interesting in and of itself. Plays with class and all of that, as most of Forster's novels do. So that one's not part of the book haul, but it's just another Forster book that I have. I've also read A Passage to India. I just did not buy that one. I think I just wasn't able to find it for cheap. But that's probably my second favorite Forster novel. I will talk about him another time. I'm digressing. Okay, so the next set of books are all written by authors from Palestinian descent. And as I think it happens, all of them are Palestinian women, which is kind of cool. Was not intentional. So, and I think people will recognize a lot of these ones because the first one is, of course, Minor Detail. And this is, as you can see, really more of a novella. The lighting just changed. I've been very interested and invested in Palestinian liberation since I was in high school, and just first learning about how the current state of Israel was formed, I was like, that doesn't sound right. So I've always been very passionate about that particular movement and that particular issue, but I've not actually read a lot of Palestinian fiction. I've read a lot of nonfiction and articles and things like that about it, but never any fiction. But I'm changing that, as you'll see, because it's almost exclusively what I have here. But anyway, so Minor Detail, this is one that's been going around a lot on BookTube, Bookstagram, BookTalk even. I know that this is a harrowing tale. It's one that is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of triggers in here, so if you are somebody who has some sensitivities, you should definitely check out those trigger warnings. But it says, this spare and haunting novel cuts to the heart of the experience of erasure, dispossession, and life under occupation in Palestine, and reveals the difficulty of piecing together the shards of a narrative concealed by a fragmented history. And that's kind of all I really want to read, because it's a novella, it's short, and I just want to get into it and read fresh. And the next one is another very popular book on BookTalk, BookTube, Bookstagram, in the Palestinian fiction, and it's kind of the one that I see the most, especially paired with Minor Detail, and that is Against the Loveless World by Susan Abulawa. So on the back it says, Nar shares her life story from an Israeli solitary confinement cell. As a young woman, she dreamed of marriage and modern appliances, but found herself a jilted bride, struggling with displacement, refugeehood, abandonment, and sexual exploitation. I'm not really going to read any more of the synopsis, because I think that gives you a good premise for what the book is about, but I am extremely excited to get into this one. I know that this is a very highly acclaimed novel at the moment, but it also has just, it's really caught my attention, and it's one that I'm very excited to read. I bought this one brand new as well as Minor Detail. So that's going to be probably like a May read, something like that, because I have a very full docket for the month of April, which I'm also reading Palestinian fiction. If you watched my April TBR video, you'll see that one of the books that I'm reading is Evil Eye by Asaf Rum, and I'm actually currently in the middle of reading that and very much enjoying it. Okay, so I think also in that video I talked about how I'm in like a real life book club. That sounded weird. I'm in a real life book club. No, so I'm in a book club IRL with real friends, and we together are reading books. But when I made that video, we were thinking about maybe doing Against the Loveless World or Demon Copperhead. Well, we did none of those, and instead we chose Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad, which is nominated for the Women's Prize. It was longlisted for the Women's Prize. And this one is about a woman of Palestinian heritage returning to Palestine and trying to reconnect with her homeland through the production of Hamlet, which I think sounds super interesting. Obviously, the title is like a piece of stage direction from Hamlet, Enter Ghost, the ghost enters the stage, etc. I didn't actually, when I bought this, I didn't realize that she was the author of the next book, which is The Parisian, which, as you can see, is a beast of a novel. And this one has been on my radar for a long time because I study French literature. I have a huge thing for France and all things French and Francophone. And then so when I found out about this one, where it's the extraordinary journey through the life and romances of one young man from his studies in France during World War I to his return to Palestine at the dawn of the battle for independence. When I saw that, like, that's literally all I really read about this book. I was hooked and completely, it had me in the palm of its hand. Blurbs can be kind of unreliable in a lot of ways, but it says a lush historical epic with echoes of Stendhal, which is one of the big 20th century, he's one of the big 19th century authors. He wrote Le Rouge et le Noir, The Red and the Black, which is just a mammoth of a book as well. I've been very interested in this book for quite a while and just haven't picked it up. But now that I have Enter Ghost, I am probably going to read both of these pretty quickly in succession. I'm going to read Enter Ghost first because it's my book club, and then I'm going to do the Parisian shortly afterwards because I am extremely interested in this one. Oh, I didn't even mention that was the last one. So yeah, that's all of them. That's all the books. That's all, folks. So yeah, that's all the books that I got from this book haul. A lot of these have been on my TBR for a long time, at least on my virtual TBR, and so I just finally got around to getting them and acquiring the physical versions because I'm just very excited about all of these. I know that all of these are going to be heavily underlined because when I read a couple of the other Forster books, there's just it's annotated to all hell. So I'm expecting that with all of these as well. But yeah, are there any of these that you are particularly interested in reading? I know that the Palestinian literature ones, those are really important right now, especially lifting up Palestinian voices and just learning as much about that particular conflict as we can, because that is the one conflict that we in the US have the most direct impact on, and the fact that our tax dollars are funding genocide is of course abhorrent, especially when it is as visible as it is just absurd that it's still happening. Anyway, but back to books. Palestinian literature, very important, and then E.M. Forster for interesting discussions on class and sort of tradition, making fun of tradition. So yeah, let me know in the comments. Whoop. Okay. See, I always see people dropping books, and I'm like, guys, it's not that hard to hold things in a stack, and then you try it, and then it's really difficult. Okay, so let me know in the comments which one of these you're most excited for me to read, which one maybe you're interested in reading. If you have read any of these and you have thoughts on some of them, maybe even some of the Forster books, let me know, because I'd be more than happy to have some conversations about these, especially as I get into reading them. So that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, give me a like and a subscribe if you're new, if you feel so inclined, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.